The Water of Life, A Tale of the Grateful Dead, a folk story, retold by Alan Trist, illustrated by Jim Carpenter. Hearken to my tale but a little while. I will tell it true and fully, as 'twas told to me, rightly as it is written, a story swift and strong, with letters locked and linking, as tales are always sung. The Gawain Poet. Chapter 1. Once upon a time there lived a mighty and beloved king who suffered a wound that would not heal. He could neither live nor die, neither lie down nor stand up, nor sit. No cure could be found, neither healing herb nor mending spell. All were fearful that he would not long survive. The land lay waste during the days of the king's affliction. The crops failed to ripen, and waterfowl would not visit their haunts in the lifeless ponds and marshes. As beats the heart, so fares the body, said the folk. They prayed that a cure would be found, because everything they loved lived without joy. Birds no longer sang. No sweet sigh of wind disturbed the gloomy silence. Sorrow reigned. The king called his physician to him one day at sunrise and said, "Merlin, I am dying, and the land lies bleak and barren. My sickness is the sickness of my realm. Hold nothing back. Is there any hope, however frail?" Merlin cocked a bushy brow, scratched his tangly beard, and pondered long. He thought with his chin upon his left hand for half a day, then shook his head and thought with his chin upon his right hand for half a day more. At long last, just as the sun slipped out of sight, he said, "There is but one certain remedy I know, though I hesitate to name it, since many have gone in search, and none has come back." "Tell me the name of this great balm, that I may consider it," said the king. "My illness is grievous to me, but the misery of the land and people grieves me more." "It is called the Water of Life," replied Merlin. "Whoever undertakes the quest to find it, with any hope of success, must show kindliness, courage, presence of mind, and be willing to take advice. Even then, the peril is great." Now the king had 3 sons. When they heard what Merlin had said, they went together to the king. The eldest said, "Let me go, father, and I'll fetch the water back." The king feared for his son because of the dangerous journey, but he reluctantly let him go, and the prince departed. In his heart the eldest thought, "Now will I be the best loved of my father, and shall inherit the kingdom." As the prince set out from the city, a beggar by the gate called out, "Spare a coin for a poor man?" The prince did not so much as turn in his saddle, but passed him by. Now this beggar was a magician, who, at the command of Merlin, protected the city gates against all evil forces, from which time to time sought entry there. Because the prince had arrogantly spurned him, the beggar cast a potent spell, which began to take effect as soon as the prince reached the mountains. There he chanced upon a ravine and started in. The further he rode, the closer the mountains drew together, till the road became so narrow he could not advance another step. It was impossible either to turn his horse or to dismount, and he was shut in as though by prison walls. A year went by, and still the king languished in pain and sorrow. When the eldest son did not return, the second approached his father and asked if he could search for the water of life. The king sighed with anxiety, but agreed, for the kingdom was now so bleak that even the sun arose but once a week. The prince, well pleased with himself, departed, thinking in his heart that now he would surely inherit the kingdom. He too passed the beggar, who called out to him, "Spare a coin for a poor man?" But the prince galloped off, without even a word, and when he reached the ravines, the same fate awaited him as had befallen his brother. The mountains closed in and held him fast. 1 more year went by. When the second son did not return, the youngest went to the king and asked to be allowed to go. Now the young prince was humped of back and weak of eye. The king thought to himself, "My son has not the strength for the journey," and he begged him to reconsider. But the prince was determined. Now the sun no longer rose at all, and the moon shone but once a fortnight. So the king gave his blessing and bade Godspeed to the last of his sons, and grieved for him. The youngest prince set off on foot to find the water of life. In his heart he listened for an inkling. As he neared the gates of the city, the beggar was sitting in his usual place. Seeing the king's third son, he said, "Spare a coin for a poor man?" The prince turned to see a man sitting on the ground, cross-legged, resting against a bundle tied with rope. The prince reached into his pocket and found 3 coins. Handing them to the beggar, he said, "May your cup be full and your nights dry and warm." "I thank you," said the beggar. "Now, if you will sit down here with me, I will give you something in return. But first you must tell me the purpose of your journey." The prince sat down beside him, saying, "I seek the water of life to heal my dying father, the king. But, may I say, it seems odd that a beggar offers to repay alms?" "You have shown me kindness," the beggar said, "and the way to the water of life is long and hard. You must pass through the dark woods, then climb high into the mountains of the north, where stands the castle of a fierce ogre. The object of your quest can be found there. In order to succeed, you must defend yourself against enemies and give of yourself when no one asks." So saying, the beggar opened his bag, which, though a patchwork of rags outside, was lined with velvet soft and fine. Rummaging in its purple depths, he brought forth a bundle of arrows wrapped in red silk, on which were embroidered symbols of potent design. "These are magic arrows," he said, "which will always hit their target, but you must believe in your aim." Then he produced from the bag, which seemed too small to hold it, a magnificent lute made of rare woods, studded with precious jewels, and signs inlaid with mother of pearl. The sparkling gems gave out a myriad of interlaced rainbows which hovered in the air about the lute. The intricate windings of the signs tied and untied themselves in knots so marvelously minute and hard to follow that, combined with the twinkling gems and deep luster of the fine-grained wood, to behold this lute was to be lost in wonder, there to glimpse the work of angels. "The music from this lute has the power to make anyone who hears it dance," said the beggar, "but only if you play it from your heart." Handing over the arrows and the lute, the beggar looked gravely at the prince and said, "Remember all I have told you. Yours is a great journey, but a difficult one." The prince thanked him for his marvelous generosity, placed the arrows in his quiver, slung the lute over his shoulder, and soon left the gates of the city far behind. 40 days the prince journeyed until he reached the wilderness beyond the fields and houses of his father's kingdom. The road narrowed to a track leading into the marshes. Keeping to dry ground, it wound its way as through a maze. Though it was early spring and the buds were blooming, snow began to fall. Soon the track faded, and the prince found himself both lost and hungry. As he was beginning to despair, out of the corner of his eye he saw a shadow slip across the snow. A fox! It stood stock still, as if stuck in the moment, holding a rabbit in its mouth. The prince fitted an arrow to his bowstring and drew back till the feathers grazed his ear. Save for the grumbling of his belly, silence and stillness endured for long moments as the prince and fox stared at each other. But his hand was stayed by pity for the beast. He could not let fly the arrow. As he lowered his bow, the fox spoke to him. "Follow me, and I will show you a way across the marshes. Do as I advise, and you will see what you will see." So saying, the fox trotted off. The prince was amazed at this speech, or indeed that a fox spoke at all. But he made haste to follow the fox prince that now led him surely across the treacherous bog. By nightfall he had reached the rising ground on the far side, and there, without another word, the fox disappeared, leaving his prey upon the ground. And so it was that the prince reached safety. After giving thanks for his timely good fortune, he spitted and roasted the rabbit, and slept the night in the dry thicket. The next day he continued on his journey. At noon he came to a place where 3 roads crossed. There he spied a dark bundle hidden in the grass. As he drew near, he saw it was a man wrapped in a cloak. The man was dead, the cloak a shroud to cover his head. The prince wondered why this corpse was tossed beside the road, abandoned, unburied, and prey to vultures. Then he saw a note pinned to the shroud, which he unfastened and read. This man died a debtor, for that his mortal remains are left by the wayside, for none can afford to bury him. The prince thought to himself, "A poor debtor, though his arm outstretched his reach, I will see his body buried for the sake of his memory." He asked at an inn how much it might cost to ransom the body of the dead man. He paid the price of the man's debts, which were many, nearly emptying his purse, and returned to claim the body. At the crossroads he met an elderly woman, who said, "This man owed me for his lodging." So the prince paid her too, with his last 3 coins, and then indeed his purse was empty. The old crone blessed him and departed. He buried the cause of his bankruptcy there and then, by the crossroads, in the shade of a great yew tree. It is said that a dead man's bones can speak through the roots of this tree, that the wind bears his words in the whispering of its leaves and carries them away. The prince set out once again. Immediately, as he entered the forest, he met a stranger who was sitting on a stump, almost invisible in the dappled shadows of evening. He was dressed as a harlequin, and from his belt there hung an assortment of objects, the uses for which were not at all obvious. The stranger hailed the prince and said, "If you are traveling through the forest, may I join you? The way ahead is dark." "Certainly you may," said the prince, "but since night is upon us, let us quickly make a fire and prepare for camp." They found a great oak tree, whose branches were so wide 100 people could sleep dry underneath, and here they made camp. The roots of this tree jutted out like armchairs, and nestled in their mossy enclosure, the stranger produced an apple from his bag. Carefully he cut it exactly in half, and gave one piece to the prince, and the other he bit into heartily, saying, "My name is Jack of all trades. Let us be companions for the journey. Tell me, what adventure takes you into the wild mountains, where there are dangerous ravines and vultures which circle overhead?" The prince, accepting his half of the apple, said, "I seek the water of life for my dying father, the king, and I must find it no matter the danger." When the prince had recounted his recent adventures, Jack said, "If you wish, I will go with you and be your companion. I am a minstrel bound for the court of that very ogre. I will help you in your quest. But first, since I know you are a fair man, you must promise to reward me with half of whatever fortune comes your way." The prince agreed to this bargain at once, and in the morning they set off together to find the ogre's castle. The way was steep, but Jack was skilled. He could tickle a fish, skin a rabbit on the run, see in the dark, and find the track where it faded in the rocky passes. When they reached the top of a high ridge, Jack pointed to where, in the distance, across several ranges of mountains, there could be seen the towers of a mighty castle. Just at that moment, a beam of sunlight caught the stone pile on its airy crag so that every detail shone sharp as a pin. "Yonder stands the castle of the giants," said Jack, "famed in days of old as the dwelling of the fabulous breed. Nowadays an ogre lives there. He is mean and tyrannical, so everyone keeps their distance. In the courtyard of the castle is the well of the world, where bubbles the water of life. But all who draw from the water from the well must be tested." They traveled on, across rocky scree and up precipitous passes, circling around the lairs of wild animals and leaping from boulder to boulder across the crashing rivers. The prince thought often of his father, his brothers, and the ravaged kingdom, and these thoughts spurred him on across the wilderness. After many days they came to the gates of the castle and were escorted at once to the hall. There they found the ogre sitting alone at the high table. Now this ogre was a frightful man, and he grimaced and glowered as they entered the hall. When he stood, he was 2 heads taller than any man. He wore a necklace of claws and was less than fair of face. In fact, quite the ugliest man the prince had ever rested eyes upon. But, wonder of wonders, he welcomed them, though gruffly, saying, "I do not get many visitors here, because people fear me. But I observe the laws of hospitality as well as anyone. Since you are here, you are here. And as long as you acknowledge my sovereignty, all the amenities of the castle are yours to command. Now tell me, why have you come?" Thanking the ogre for his generosity, the prince explained, "I seek a vial of the water of life to heal my father, the king, whose kindness is the joy of one and all, and the delight of whose people was once a legend in this land. But now the land has sickened, and can only be restored by the precious water, according to the great sage Merlin, his physician." "The water is my property indeed," said the ogre, "though it's of little use to me, for I have not the merits it requires to unleash its powers. But before I'll let go a vial of it, you must each pledge your faithful service against my enemies and join me in the hunt. When you have done me service equal to its value, as I see it, then you shall have the water by the bucket, if such as you desire." And so it was agreed, and indeed there was no cause for argument. From that day the prince and Jack rode often with the ogre across his rugged domain. One day, while hunting, they came to a glade in a grove of ancient trees, and there they stopped to rest. Suddenly, from the sun-dappled edges of the glade, a shape hurtled, swift as a gust of wind. A boar! It came charging, immense and powerful, eyes a glinting flame, razor-sharp tusks curled about its foaming snout. It charged the ogre, who, with a mighty heave, hurled his spear, but as he let go, the point, badly secured by a loose rivet, dropped to the ground, and the ogre stood helpless before the ferocious beast. The prince notched an arrow to his bow and was on the point of letting fly when the thought struck him, "If I withhold my shot, I will be rid of this dangerous ogre and his bargain, and can escape with the water of life." The prince considered this temptation for only a split second longer than it took him to think it, and let fly with a magic arrow at the last possible moment. The boar fell dead at the ogre's feet. The ogre was shaken by this narrow escape. When he had recovered somewhat from the shock, he said to the prince, "Thank you for saving my life. What is more, this boar has terrorized my hunting parties in this country for years, and no one has been able to subdue it. How is it that your arrow hit the mark, and why did you take so long to loose it?" The prince thought hard about this, for indeed the ogre had noticed his hesitation. Finally he said, "I consider consequences, perhaps to a fault, but when I loose my shaft, it is in trust I shoot." And the ogre considered this revelation silently, as well he might. Full summer came to the land, and after a while Jack said to the prince, "I have business to attend to, and must leave you, but you have not seen the last of me. Where and when you need me, there I'll be." He gave the prince a parting gift, saying, "This vial of purest crystal was given to me by Merlin. Its chain is made of unbreakable links as fine as spider's web." And Jack departed. Soon the prince seemed to have forgotten the purpose of his journey altogether, so enchanted was he by the agreeable life at the ogre's court. The days passed easily and pleasurably, one into another, with games, tournaments, and hunting. It was as if a spell attended him. So it was, for the ogre was not anxious to lose a valuable warrior, and had bonded the prince to him with these enchantments. But the prince knew, deep inside his heart, that a mission had brought him to this place, one of great importance, although, try as he might, he could not recall nothing of its nature. And so one day he sought the solitude of a place of stone, where 3 dreams crossed together. There he kept a vigil through the day and on into the night. As the moon rose, an owl called, as though announcing a visitation. And indeed, on turning round, he saw a woman of shining beauty, who said in song, without words, in a language only his heart could understand, "Drink these drops of life's own water, and you will remember your mission." Into his hand she placed a rose petal, on which were collected 3 drops. Then she vanished among the shadows of the brooding stones. The prince pressed the petal to his lips and soon fell into blissful slumber, dreaming of a golden road which wound through the mountains, down, down, through a gorge of diamond waterfalls, to the banks of a sweetly singing river, where he drank deeply and bathed as though cradled in its arms. At dawn he awoke, refreshed in strength and spirit. As his gaze settled again on the unmoving stones, he remembered the purpose of his journey and realized, with dismay, how far he had gone astray from his intention. Upon returning to the castle, the prince said to the ogre, "My father has need of me. It is time that I return to him with the water of life." The ogre knew that one so pure of purpose could no longer be contained, so he agreed. "You have served me faithfully and well. Tomorrow, draw whatever portion you desire from the well of the world as your reward. But first there will be a feast, a sumptuous feast, as befits one of noble lineage, whom I foresee will one day inherit a kingdom richer than my own. At the feast, I will ask you to perform one final test, and this, the greatest test of all." Now, in the castle dwelt a beautiful princess called Kate, held captive by the ogre because she refused to marry him. Often the prince had looked upon her beauty with wonder. His heart went out to her. But the power of the spell the ogre had cast was such that the thoughts of the moment were left in the hour in which they had arisen, so that he never remembered from one day to the next that he loved her. Unknown to him, Kate had an eye which could look directly into the heart. She had never laid this eye upon a purer heart than that of the son of the wounded king. At the feast of departure, the ogre said, "The princess sits beside me, pale and unsmiling. I cannot endure her sadness and reproof any longer. No music has moved her. If you can make her forget her sorrow and dance, I will give you a reward, remarkable man that you are, and this shall be your choice of anything in my kingdom you should desire." The prince said, "If I could perform this service, my heart would be glad for her sake." Whereupon he took out the magic lute and carefully removed its covering of jet black otter fur, lined with softest doe skin. He unwrapped the fine linen, white as the swan's throat, which covered the strings. Then he played a song of such beauty and variety of mood that everyone present, from courtier to scullery maid, felt the sap of life course in their veins and saw, if only for a moment, the lovers of their dreams come forth to join the dance. As the tempo reached for a jig, the princess rose to join them, and then, like eternal ice at last giving way to fervent sunshine, she slowly began to smile. Only the prince noticed that the lute played itself, though his fingers moved fast upon the strings, and only he heard the pounding of his own heart. When the dance was over, the ogre said, "Since you have accomplished this feat, as well as saving my life, anything in my kingdom is yours. What is your desire?" "She who is the most beautiful in your kingdom," said the prince without hesitation, so strong had grown his love. "Kate, who sits by your side." The ogre sighed. At length he said, "You have fairly won my wager, though my heart is broken to lose her. I am a man of chivalry and bound by my word, and so I do release her." And so he did. Many years later, the ogre wed a lady of his court, and it was said that in earnest of her love, he was less of a tyrant than before. But I have not myself returned to that realm to discover the truth of this. The prince said to Kate, "If you desire, and my hump does not deter you, I will escort you back to your father's realm." But the princess remained silent. "Then I will spend my entire life alone, composing songs to your beauty," said the prince. "I would rather hear your songs," Kate then replied, "so sweetly do you play them. As for your hump, it will make a fine saddle for our children." And for love declared, they embraced and agreed to travel together with the water of life and be married in the prince's city. The company at the ogre's feast celebrated their betrothal, and cheers and merrymaking long into the night. Next day, the prince took out the crystal vial which Jack had given him and approached the well of the world. The ogre heaved aside the stone which covered the mouth of the well and bade him dip. Out of the well there rushed a song which put even the lute to shame. Its beauty was so exquisite that the ogre stood dumbfounded for a moment. "I cannot bear too much of this," he said. "Fill your vial quickly, that I may replace the stone, before I cast myself inside and drown." When the vial had been filled and the stone replaced, The maiden and the young prince mounted twin silver steeds and bid their host farewell. As they reached the bridge at the bottom of the hill, where the wilderness began, there sat the beggar, leaning against his bundle tied with rope. He called to the prince, "We meet once more, and well met, for I have news for you. But first, will you trade again? You know I earn my living with advice." The prince gave several coins of silver to the beggar, saying, "You have been true so far, I well know, and I thank you for it. What is your advice?" The beggar told him, "Your enchantment ends as soon as you cross this bridge. Take care you do not make trouble for yourself by aiding those who would turn your aid to profit against you. Are mountains less treacherous to cross going than coming?" "I thank you for the warning," said the prince, "but I have a question. Do you know the whereabouts of my brothers? They left before me, but did not return." "They are walled up in the ravines not far from here," the beggar replied. "They are arrogant and hard-hearted, and it is my pleasure to retain them there." "I beg you to release them," said the prince. "They are my brothers, and it would be fitting if we could return together to our father with the object of our quest." At this, the beggar relented. "I have my doubts," he said, "but I will release them. Take care to remember my warning." The prince and Kate set off down the road once more. After a few days' journey, they came to a place close by the ravines. The elder brothers had just emerged from these enclosures, looking haggard and more than a little sorry for themselves. The three brothers greeted one another warmly, for it was 3 years since they had been together. It was closing on to dusk, and since they were but a short distance from the oak tree, whose branches would keep 100 sleepers dry, they retired there to make camp and tell of their adventures. There was much laughter and good company, but when the elder brothers learned that the younger had succeeded in gaining the water of life, they grew envious. When they next learned that the prince was betrothed to Kate, who would inherit her father's kingdom, and probably their own father's as well, the elder brothers could no longer hold back their wrath, and they attacked the prince, removed the vial from round his neck, and threw him down a well. They took the sacred water and stole off into the night, thinking, "Surely now one of us will inherit the kingdom." And they took the princess with them, bound and stuffed into a sack. The prince passed the long night, crouched and bewailing his fate. Looking up, he saw the moon pass over, uncovering the well of the firmament. He dreamed of a land cloaked in mist, and a sun yearning to break forth from a cloud of densest gloom. When day came, he awoke, and after several moments realized a familiar pair of eyes stared down at him. The fox! With his nimble paws, the fox let down a rope and said, "Climb up, do as I advise, and you will see what you will see." The prince was anxious to do just that, and quickly reached the top, where he saw, to his astonishment, the Jack-of-all-trades sat upon the grass. "Greetings, Prince," said Jack. "I am glad to see you. How did you manage to fall down a well?" When the prince explained that he had been betrayed by his brothers, who had then absconded with the princess and the water, Jack said, "It seems I got here in the nick of time. I will help you get back what is rightly yours. But we must set off at once, for the robbers have a day's start and have taken your horses." They quickly shared a meal together, which Jack had tucked in his sack, a sack of small size but enormous capacity. When the prince had packed up the scraps and risen to his feet, there was a loud crack, as though of thunder, but sharp and quick. To his complete amazement, the hunch which deformed his back had straightened right out. "This is a marvelous thing that has happened," the prince said, "for I am healed of my affliction. What could have worked this wonder?" "Such a crunch as you suffered last night might well have had something to do with it," replied Jack, looking sly as a fox. "Wonders never cease, and one good turn does deserve another." As they set off, the prince had an inkling that Jack had more trades under his belt than he had imagined. Soon they met the old woman at the place where 3 roads cross. The prince asked her, "Where can we obtain 2 horses?" "Since my husband is dead, I have no further use for his," she replied. "I am too old to take the saddle myself, so take them, and may God speed your journey." Since it was 40 days by foot to his father's city, the prince was glad to be mounted, and he thanked the old woman from the bottom of his heart. The prince and Jack rode off at a gallop, intent on catching up with the robber brothers. Meanwhile, the kingdom suffered as never before. The sun and moon had ceased to shine, and utter darkness ruled the land. Frost had piled upon frost, and tallow tapers made due for daylight. Yet through it all the king survived, though his breath would not have extinguished the smallest candle faintly flickering in the endless night. When the elder brothers arrived, they went straight to the king's bedside and said, "We have brought you the water of life after braving many dangers and hardships." The king managed to say, "Thank you, my faithful sons," and he took a sip of the remedy at once. But it did not work, and the king fell in a swoon and seemed to breathe no more. On witnessing this, Kate said, "These brothers are false. It is the youngest, my betrothed, who drew this water from the well of the world and heard its song, which he hummed to me. These cowardly sons of yours betrayed his trust, cast him down a well, stole the water, and carried me away against my will." But she was not believed, because there was no proof. She turned away, but did not despair. In her heart, she knew that these ordeals tested her, and she held firm to the image of her beloved. Right then there was a knock at the door, and Merlin came into the chamber with the prince and Jack, who had followed hard on the heels of the elder brothers. Everyone began to argue about what the truth of the matter really was. But Merlin, knowing all the secrets of the water, arched his bushy brows, stroked his tangly beard, and said, "There is a proof. The water of life has virtue only when given by one who fetched it honestly. Let the young prince administer the potion, since the others have failed." This the prince did, and after a short time the king recovered from fever and slept peacefully. Outside the palace window, the moon broke through the clouds in radiant splendor, and the song of the nightingale was heard for the first time in 3 years. The next day, in full light of sunshine, news spread that the king had walked in the gardens and had plucked a rose whose thorn had drawn blood. One drop, and the wound was healed. Rejoicing resounded in every house, and the crops, so long drooped, straightened their stalks and opened their ears. The birds began to sing, but with a different tune. The music of the well of the world poured forth with every note. A breeze which had been hiding in the curtains of the silent years began to billow forth, and blew away the last cold breaths of sickly air. The king called his council together and proclaimed his judgment. From this day forward, my eldest sons shall go forth to the fields and learn the work of the plow. With all their privilege and schooling, they have learned nothing at all, so let them learn the arts of the yield. My youngest son has proved himself loyal, and in their place he stands, steadfast and true. He shall have my kingdom, and his wedding shall be the jewel which completes my crown. When spring once more covered the barren earth with color and scent, Kate and the prince were wed, a cause of happiness to everyone, as can be judged by the accounts of the feasting and toasting, which were said to have lasted 101 days, though this may be an exaggeration. After a while, the land was fully restored to health. Honeysuckle trailed on the trellis. Coltsfoot and morning glory exalted in their new life. The waterfowl splashed and frolicked again in the royal ponds and emerald marshes. Then Jack said to the prince, "A minstrel's life is to be ever upon his way, so I have come to bid you farewell and claim my half of our bargain." "You shall have it," said the prince, "but to live up to the bargain, I must cut the princess in two. To avoid so dreadful a division, I beg you to accept my entire kingdom instead of the half of it." Whereupon Jack said, "Have no fear for the wholeness of Kate, for in fact you have already paid me fully. I am the spirit of he whom you buried at the crossroads. I am grateful for your kind act, which frees me to return to the netherworld in peace. There I will have no use for a kingdom, or even half of one. You have been honest, generous with your friendship, and owe me nothing." The prince was too astonished to say anything in response to this revelation, but when the king heard of it, he said to the grateful dead man, "This is a wonder that shall be proclaimed to the ends of the earth. You have helped my son succeed in fetching the water of life, and thereby the bounty of the land is restored, and the animals once more bear their young. As a reward, you may choose anything in my kingdom to take with you on your journey to the netherworld." And Jack chose the lute and magic arrows, food and drink for the journey, and departed, but not without a wink at the beggar, who was sitting in his usual place by the gates of the city.